Hello, you are watching the Mongols Podcast. This is the Senate speaking. And, well, we're here to hear about some more Mongols. Here we have a very special guest, Jack Meister.
Hello.
Also known as Jack. And Robin.
Hi.
Also known as Bijubi.
Hi.
And, well, if nobody knows Jack Meister here, he is a relatively notable YouTuber that actually talks about the Mongols all the time. Much more than I do.
Well, maybe twice a month, if you're lucky.
Now there's a mood.
Oh, dear.
Yes, and I've also written for Kings and Generals. We're doing their second season on the fall of the Mongol Empire, so we've done the Mongol invasions of Japan, Vietnam, and we're doing quite a number more, but on the invasions of Indonesia, Burma, Kaidu, Mamluk Ilkhanate Wars, the later Golden Horde invasions of Eastern Europe, and then there will be a video on the fall of the Golden Horde and good old Timur's invasion. And then, if you're really well behaved, I think we're going to do a series on old Tamerlane himself.
Ah, yes.
Which is going quite a bit beyond the Mongols, but it is the same milieu, the same mess that Chinggis left Asia in.
And he's technically in charge of the old Khanates anyway, right?
Well, Timur actually appoints, or there's kind of puppet khans of the Ilkhanate, and
Right.
There's some who work for Timur, but he also had puppet khans of the Chagatayans, who were actually descendants of Ergadai, and then he had sort of a puppet khans appointed in the Golden Horde, and probably would have done the Yuan, in the Northern Yuan if he'd had the chance.
If the Yuan weren't kicked out of China, he died of a cold.
And he died before, on the way to the attack the Ming Dynasty. One of those big what-ifs, if he'd lived another year, what kind of mess he would have made in Gansu. So, yes. But yes, that's my small resume there, and I'm trying to do my MA in my master's in this area.
Oh, wow.
So that's my calling, as it were.
I can certainly see that. You're very good at this. And today, our topic is whatever happened post-Manduhai. Because we have a very, very dead mom wife, and everybody is mourning.
Very, very dead mom wife. She's very dead.
I'll also be posting the link to Jack Meister's YouTube channel in the description so you guys can all watch it because, dear Lord, you need more subscribers.
I think I'm just about at 4,000 now. So, which is pretty small by YouTube. But I guess for people putting historical videos up on YouTube, actually for people putting historical videos on the Mongol Empire on YouTube, probably the upper echelons of that.
Well, hey, you're getting closer to it.
Mongolian YouTube royalty.
Well, you're getting closer to that classic old size of a two-man, right?
Yes, I'm half a two. I'm 4 Minghans right now, I guess.
Right, that's about right.
Yes, so Arban is 10, Shogun is 100, Minghans 1,000, Tumans 10,000. Although a Tumen probably never was exactly 10,000. It was probably never quite full strength. So
doesn't surprise me.
I'm a severely understaffed Tumen.
It happens. But anyways, so we're now looking at Manduhai's adopted son / husband, known as Dayan Khan, and he decides to stay strong and keep a pretty nice empire going. And I think actually this sort of second empire, as I like to call it, actually has a couple of benefits over the old one. Mainly, it's a lot more manageable, and you can still make a good amount of money because you're still on a trade route. You don't have to own everything.
Yes, and of course by then, the Oirats are not quite the threat in Mongolia they had been a couple generations prior.
Yeah.
Dayan Khan has a much more, not only a more manageable size of an empire, but comparatively speaking, he's a lot more of a friendly political climate around him too.
Right. The Ming are actually butting up with him a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a really weird phase for the Mongols. First we raid the Chinese, then we pillage the Chinese and sack all their cities, take over the empire, then get kicked out and decide to be besties for a hot century. But it's not all rosy. Dayan does like to raid every now and then, and actually in 1517 he actually gets within a few miles of Beijing. Mm-hmm. But the Ming managed to hold him off, and considering that he's found his supplies dangerously low, he decided, all right, I'm gonna head back.
I'm gonna head out.
And throughout my research, I also found that there's a lot of disagreement of when exactly he died, so I'm going to say probably the latest is 1526. But he does a couple of other things that are also quite important. He actually sort of splits the empire into left and right wings amongst his kids. Now, this normally sounds like a really bad idea. Because, well, that's the Mongol Empire. You leave it to your kids and they'll mess it up real fast.
Don't leave your empire to your kids. We, covered this in, 8 different episodes.
But since it's only split among 2 kids, we have fewer problems.
Okay. That's valid.
And there are enough times that the Ming actually try to strike back that the Mongols decide, hey, we can set aside our difference and collaborate every once in a blue moon.
Well, it's cheaper from the Chinese perspective for them to send tribute, allow some trade with the Mongols, than to be constantly sending off empires into the steppe.
Right.
What's his name now? After the Hongwu Emperor. Is that the Yongle Emperor?
Yeah, that is the Yongle Emperor.
Yes.
He's the...
And of course, his number of campaigns onto the steppe there are pretty much unique, almost unique in Chinese history, for cases where there is this massive Chinese army actually operating effectively on the steppe. Several times, in fact. Well, effectively, quote-unquote, at times, but certainly a lot better than a lot of his predecessors or successors would.
Yeah. If I remember correctly, the reason why the Yongle Emperor is able to do this is because he's actually one of the few Ming emperors that actually comes onto the throne with some bona fide military experience, and also because he kind of has a bit of a fragile masculinity because he actually stole the throne from his nephew. Mm-hmm. Which is also why he commissioned Zheng He to do all his crazy trading and shipping and pirate killing.
The Yongle Emperor was not a pleasant fellow,
No,
to
doesn't
put it.
sound good.
You don't overthrow your nephew without a couple legs broken.
But the Ming dynasty, especially the early Ming dynasty, has such a phobia and a reaction to the Mongols that a lot of their early policies are kind of their reaction to the perceived faults of the Yuan and the need to we can't let this happen again. So you see this heavy expenditure on military campaigns against the Northern Yuan, and then famously this culminates in the creation of this massive wall along the northern border, only for the Ming to collapse due to a peasant uprising from the south.
A post-Mongolic stress disorder, I guess you could call it.
Oh my gosh.
Of course, the Yuan emperors from Kublai to Tolga Timur had this reputation in the later history right now in modern history for being these ultimate dictators, authoritative rulers. But what was rather the opposite, where the local powers, local governors, had a lot of power at the expense of the Han, whose power in theory was total, but he just left everything to subordinates. The early Ming thought, it was this weakness of the central authority that we have to avoid. So you end up with the early emperors like Hongwu, Yongle, on just power trips, you might say, building their empire, well, not walls, rather, but building these huge armies, sending off treasure fleets, all these things, really strengthening the power of the emperor. And then when these walls are built, after the Tumu crisis, over the course of the later 15th, 16th centuries there, that's a weakness of the central authority in the Ming Dynasty. They can't get armies together like they could have under the Yongle Emperor. Didn't have to say military capability vis-a-vis the Mongols, who, of course, in this period, as you have been covering, are now getting back into a semblance of what's the word now?
Semblance of power?
Yes, sort of getting back on their feet after a century, after they've been expelled from China, dominated by the Oirats there.
Yeah. And also, one of the other things that is really important here, especially considering our last episode, is that we have absolutely no Taishas. We have killed them. We do not hire anymore. We do not bring them around anymore, because all they ever do is keep the Khan inside his tent and make sure he doesn't do anything while he runs the empire and is a complete arse. Just look at Essen. Yeah. And that leads, and of course, Dayan Khan continues his reign of stability, continues raiding some Chinese provinces whenever tribute is not paid. Some of the notables here are Liaodong, Gansu, Datong, Shuanhua, and Yansui provinces. And this is mainly coming from the idea of, these are all northern provinces, northern western provinces, within easy reaching distance. This is not as much range as Kublai would have, who was able to raid / conquer even the south of China, and that's usually where nomadic barbarians stop whenever they try to pillage the heck out of China. And
even the Jin dynasty there, the border with the Song dynasty they could never get past, was the Huai River there.
Yeah, I remember.
That was as far as they could get. And below that, the climate becomes considerably more difficult for operating. You don't have the same empty plains. Of course, the key to the Mongol conquest of the southern Song was learning how to fight on the rivers and building their own naval fleets on the rivers.
Not to mention bring all these siege engines.
The other naval expenditures did not go as well, rather famously.
Oh, right, typhoons. Out of season typhoons.
What?
Oh, yeah, the Indonesia one. They lost a bunch of Mongols to disease, and then the last couple were killed off by the Majapahits on a drunken party.
He betrayed them. He used the Mongols to defeat the group that was rebelling there, and then betrays the Mongols, and they go running with their tails back to China. But yes, Dayan Khan. Dayan, now, from what I understand, he's not really conquering anything. Rather, like you're saying, it's just raiding. He's keeping the territory he has to control to a relatively manageable size. Avoiding overextension. He's going into China, but it's to raid, or it's to get the Ming to begin or open trade back up between them, and force the Ming to keep that trade open, rather than, as his ancestors had done, go in, destroy cities. From what I understand, there's not a lot of evidence that the later Northern Yuan had much siege capability.
That's about right. They didn't. I've looked at some of the stuff on the Northern Yuan, and I've never seen a trebuchet or a cannon in their squads. And that is problematic when you have as big Chinese fortified cities like Beijing.
I think they, after the Tumu crisis there, they raid the suburbs of Beijing, and that's about as far as they get at that point, isn't it?
Because walled cities, right. Right. Where are the days that you could just throw a diseased carcass over the walls and just let everyone die of plague?
I want to throw a diseased Can you throw my diseased carcass over a wall?
Well, we'd have to infect you with the plague first.
Can you arrange that? What Mongolian person do I call to arrange that?
Supposedly Jonabeg Han of the Golden Horde.
Oh.
Oh, that would be about a century before this, I guess. So I don't.
Oh, right, when he's besieging Kaffa. Oh, right, that's when he's besieging Kaffa, right.
His number, you know.
Right.
I'm sure I can figure out a way to set that up.
So, yeah. And after Dayan Khan dies, he tries to declare his grandson, Bodhi Alag, as Khan, but his second son, Bars Bolad Khan, decides, I want to be Khan first, because I'm the oldest, I get to do whatever I want. Or at least, like, second oldest son, somewhere in there, because even one of the first, one of the first sons of Dayan Khan and Manduhai actually died while going out on his first government posting. The Altan Topshi actually mentions this. He was sent to govern a tribe, which was unfortunately ruled by a warlord named Ibari, who killed the son. And, well, Dayan Khan's like, you don't kill my kids, and I don't kill you. But since you killed my kid, excuse me.
You have killed my kid. Prepare to die.
Bingo! But but Bodhi Alag isn't exactly taking Bars Bolad's coup d'état down. He's going to actually team up with one of Bars Bolad's younger brothers to actually get some power to take the throne back, and Bars Bolad decides to step aside, and he catches something and dies of natural causes in about 1531. And then Bodhi Alag reigns in relative peace, doing what Dayan Khan has been doing for about the next 16 years up until he dies in about 1547. And his son, Dari's son Guden Khan, also then comes onto the throne. But the thing is, Bars Bolad kind of had a kid left behind. And that...
kind of had a kid left behind?
Yeah, the kids...
Like, at least maybe sort of had a kid left behind? Like, oh, there might be a kid that has been left behind, but we're not sure.
And this kid happens to be the future Altan Khan.
Altan Han.
Yeah.
Tumid, isn't it?
Yep. And he decides, well, I don't like Dare Sung, and I want the kind of power that my dad had. So he very successfully rebels and kicks Dare Sung Guden Khan out of the eastern parts of the Second Mongol Empire and forces him over to, I believe, the left wing of the empire.
Well, how rude.
Well, at least the guy's still alive. Because let me remind you, if this was Chinggis, he would not have left Dare Sung alive. He would have broken his back, literally.
Chinggis wasn't famous for forgiving his enemies, not a forgive and forget kind of fellow.
More like forgive and break the back. Jamukai can vouch.
Oh, pro Jamuka. Now, Altan Han, of course, perhaps he was civilized by the introduction of Buddhism, or rather reintroduction of Buddhism.
Right. Dayan Khan also built a lot of temples, specifically on Kokonor, and they were often revered as the protectors of the Dalai Lama, which is something I totally forgot to bring up.
Also, the Dalai Lama, the third Dalai Lama was a Chinggisid, was he not?
I believe that is correct, yes. Altan's grandson, to be more precise.
Oh, nice. And so, of course, the name Dalai Lama, that title was granted. I don't know by which one of these Northern Hans, but that was one of the Northern Yuan Hans who gave the title to this head Buddhist monk.
Oh.
Dalai Lama, Dalai being the Mongolian word for ocean.
Right.
Oceanic.
Right. Oh, that's Dayan Khan's successor, Tumen Zagast. Yeah.
Well,
there's not too much records left about these guys, mostly just like a few sentences, at least, that I found throughout the Altan Topshi, which I managed to find within the Kent State Library and had that shipped over to me.
Yeah, well, all of that 16th to early 18th century, those Mongol sources, Altan Topçi, Erdinyan Topçi, Çağrı Tuji, they're, as one historian put it, they're uneven historical value. I think that was Christopher Atwood.
Right.
Down there. It's like material taken like directly from the secret history, like parts of that, and then just Buddhist nonsense almost added onto that in the Erdinyan Topçi.
Right.
When it's discussing the death of Genghis Khan, before he kills the Tangut king, he and the Tangut king have a battle where each of them are transforming into animals. And, each one keeps transforming into a more powerful animal. And then Genghis Khan ends up winning because he ends up transforming into Tengri, Almighty Blue Heaven.
Right.
Well, I'm done for, mate.
Well, I
And
didn't
gives
realize
himself up.
that. I didn't realize that they had a Pokemon back then.
I was thinking Journey to the West, but okay.
Well, you see, and there's lots of stuff like that where it's like, if someone was reading this, how literal are they supposed to be interpreting this? Are they supposed to know that, oh, this is in that Buddhist canon? Each one of these sources start off with like a genealogy going back to the Buddhist kings in India.
Oh, right.
And then, of course, who gets connected to these Buddhist kings? Genghis Khan.
Giving him more legitimacy. Wonderful.
Exactly, but also making him now more palatable to the...
Right, because this is still... Everybody doesn't like the Mongols because Mongols burn things.
That's a valid reason to dislike the Mongols.
So, and back to this period why we have such trouble with the dates and not a lot of information on these monarchs. A lot of these Mongol chronicles of this period, for these kings, they have just like king lists. And it's literally like, oh, they might have year he was born, maybe the year he became Han, maybe the year he died, sometimes all three, sometimes just two of those, maybe one or two things these guys did. And if we're lucky, sorry, they can corroborate this with the border reports from the Ming Dynasty at the time. And then that sort of lets us build up this case.
Right.
And it's but other than that, like you have to be very careful using the sources of this period.
Well, I've certainly had some difficulty with some of the sources I found. Like, I think my second episode specifically was covering Marco Polo. That's its own complications and problems, especially when your ghostwriter happens to be an Arthurian fanfiction.
Sort of, Marco Polo at times reads like a fever dream.
Oh, it absolutely does.
But he's actually enjoyed a bit of a re-evaluation the last couple decades there, and a lot of historians like Stephen Haw, Igor D. Rashevitz have shown quite conclusively, yes, he was in China, and this is actually very valuable information. Like Stephen Haw, for example, he's gone to China and like hunted down the locations on Polo's supposed route and like found, say, flora and fauna Polo was describing and going, this is fantastic. Like, this is an exact description. Obviously very difficult to describe for an audience who's never seen it. Also, you don't know what the words were in the original language. They can't exactly Google pictures of it. And, of course, the problems with Rusticelli, and the own problems of human memory over the sometimes 20, 30 years between when he was remembering these things.
Right.
With all of that in mind, historians like Stephen Haw have gone through and gone, well, this is actually like pretty good descriptions. You know, the descriptions that would have been very hard to get if he hadn't been there himself. And as they put it, if Marco Polo was a liar, he was a stunningly meticulous one.
If I remember correctly, he was on his deathbed when they told him, recant everything you just wrote, and he was like, I haven't told you half of what I saw, all right? And he's like, bye.
I think Polo he release an edited version of the travels, sometimes after Rusticelli's initial publication.
Right. Never trust the Arthurian fanfiction boy.
And then, of course, the work's gone through all of these translations, all of these copyists, translations out of the very particular dialect that Rusticelli was writing in, because he was writing in like a very specific form of Venetian with like French influences, but he didn't always know the French words, so he was like sounding them out almost.
Right.
And of course, you have all these later copyists, people reading it, can't read the original writing and go, was that say 100 or 10,000? Well, 10,000 sounds more impressive. This city has 10,000 bridges now. I think that was a lot of that probably happened. Of course, the Christianization of Kublai there.
Yeah, that was probably a bit of exaggeration, but anyways, and one of the other things I also picked up, I think at least from some of the older secondary sources I found on the Mongols, especially when I wrote a paper on this once, is that they're noticing that the more Buddhist temples, the more Buddhist monks that are showing up in the Second Empire, the less raiding and warring that's going on a statistic level. I'm not exactly sure of that, but I think there's a lot of trends going towards the idea of the Second Empire is sort of showing cracks, but it won't go out with the kind of absolute bang that the first one went out with. But anyways, Altan Khan actually keeps control of the eastern parts of the Second Empire and really does well for himself. He continues doing the raiding that Dayan Khan does, controls the trade routes, gets some trade agreements with the Ming hashed out, and even, I believe, lives long enough to see the end of the sail ban on the Ming, because the Ming were dumb enough to ban sailing. and he keeps everything up until about 1582, and, well, he dies of old age there, and surprisingly long-lived, about 72 years.
That's pretty good.
And that's
Chinggis princes in the 13th century didn't make 7 years.
Blame alcohol for that. Like, seriously. Kublai Khan, cause of death, drunkenness. Tolui, drunkenness. Ogredai, drunkenness.
For the Yuan Hans after Kublai, not counting Toga and Timur, the average length of their reign was, I think, 5 years.
Oh, wow.
Not a single one died of natural causes, except Toga, Timur, and Kublai. And I think their average age at death was something like 32. It was just a mess. It was probably not just alcoholism, but also that infighting, things like...
Yeah, infighting, continuous outbreaks of bubonic plague.
Well, in the Ilkhanate...
right.
We have to say the Khans dying early, young, but also now dying without children, too.
Right.
Abu Sa'id did in 1335.
Right. That's what allowed Timur to show up and take over the Ilkhanate, basically.
Couple decades later. Timur, according to some of his later biographers, was born the same year Abu Sa'id died. Abu Sa'id being the last effect of Ilkhan. And then the Ilkhanate breaks up into, well, basically what happens is you have these powerful emirs, each one choosing their own Ilkhan. So you have Ilkhans in Khorasan, Ilkhans in the west, and then they stop wasting time with the Ilkhans, and it just breaks into smaller states. Jalayirids, Trobanids, Injuids, Musafarids, and then these are what Timur swallows up after 1370.
Right. You guys can see why I brought Jack onto this show. He knows a lot more than I do.
I read the last couple of days, I read all of Roivan Amitai Price's Mamluks and Mongols, so I got a lot of Ilkhanites on the brain right now.
That's valid.
That is a valid thing, and that is a valid thing to think about.
Anyways, so
Right, and now with Altan Khan dying in 1582 of natural causes, we have Tumen Zagas Khan, who goes for about another 10 years after Altan's last reign, and Tumen Zagas is actually a descendant of Darius and Gudin, aka the guy that got kicked out, and that means that for a short time, the left and right wing doesn't exactly exist, but and the Second Empire is technically more united and centralized. That's not going to last for very long. And he's also basically the last Han with of the Second Empire with any real power. Because when he died, after he dies in 1592, he gets succeeded by his son Buyan Khan, and Buyan Han. And from whatever I researched, I think from Peter Perdue's China Marches West, Buyan Sechen was almost completely a symbolic figurehead that basically was let the bureaucrats run everything, while I suppose he drank and had sexy times.
Oh, we love the sexy times.
Yeah.
And a lot of these final Northern Yuan Hans are, I think, basically just figureheads from now on.
Right.
Until Ligdan Han, isn't it?
Ligdan Han is less of a figurehead than Buyan Han, but that's partly because he's got big border problems. Because the thing is, while the Mongol Empire, the Second Mongol Empire, is going a little bit downhill, the Ming are objectively worse off. There's a massive peasant uprising. In addition to the Ming emperors had quite a long reign, where the emperor just spent the last 3 decades. 3 decades? I don't know if it's quite that long, but last 3 decades of his reign, not doing any ruling, just partying, whatever, ignoring. Like, he refused to meet with any of his ministers, and that just put the Ming on just an absolute downward spiral. The final emperors were just not up to the task of averting. Most have never actually ventured out beyond the Forbidden City, so that makes absolute perfect sense.
And then with this huge peasant uprising, and our old friends, the Jurchen, have put on a new hat.
Oh, right.
Back on their feet after the 13th century.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, Jurchen, you might know them better from their new moniker taken in this period, the Manchu. Right, because the initial thing is that Narachi actually comes to power amongst one of the many Jurchen tribes, and he rules up until about 1626, when he tragically dies in battle, getting shot up by Ming cannon. And after that, his successors decide, we need a new name, because the thing was, he was going along with staying with the Jurchen, founding basically the new Jin dynasty. But the Manchus decided, well, we want to sound a little cooler, so we're going to call ourselves the Qing dynasty. Reorganized into the new Jin Empire. Later Jin, I think, is what they call themselves.
Right, yeah.
So there's 3 Qin dynasties in Chinese history. The Jin of the 4th century, the only one who was actually Chinese, and then the Jurchen Jin, the Great Jin, and then the later Jin, the Qing dynasty.
Yes, indeed. And of course, that's not the only border problem that the Second Mongol Empire is going to have, because Russia's in town. Russia is expanding straight through whatever's basically left of the Golden Horde. And the Golden Horde has been split up between all of Batu Khan's kids, and has just been fought over for centuries and centuries, up until, well, the Russians declare independence and conquer everyone.
And little help from Timur came in there.
Right.
And, literally destroyed all the main cities of the Golden Horde just when it looked like it was getting back onto its feet there under Toktamish.
Yeah, Toktamish was actually pretty solid as a ruler up until Timur wrecked his stuff. And And one of the other things that's really helping with the Russians is that they have their own pool of mounted archers that are loyal to them, specifically the Cossacks, who are a lot of very runaway peasants that have escaped the terrible life of Russian serfdom, because it always sucked. Why are you asking any other questions?
Well, and they also had rifles.
Right, yeah.
Not really the rifles, it's like rifling, but...
Yeah, the muskets are just kind of all over the place. The Ming are known for some rather exotic weaponry, including some early machine guns. One of my personal favorites as far as Ming exotic weaponry goes is actually a variation of the crossbow known as, I believe, the Sangong Nu, which is so awesome that you can be casually sitting on your horse about a kilometer away from the Great Wall and boom, a giant bolt just went through you. Or at least that's what my sources say.
The Manchu had the good fortune of some very poorly led, poor morale Chinese armies abandoning all their firearms and cannon, and the Manchu were able to get a hold of.
Yeah, that was one of their things. They captured a lot. They captured a lot of engineers over in, I believe, the Liaodong province, and that's sometime after Nurachi's death. Because Nurachi was specifically actually shot up by a gun. And then after that, well, the Qing had good guns and often better guns than whatever the Ming had. And I believe the peasant revolt was also the peasant rebellion was also having some major gun power. And the Oirats are also doing fairly fine for themselves, gathering in coalitions made to hold off the Altan Han, who is not to be confused with Altan Han that just died a few decades ago.
The 1630s, that is the founding of the Zhungar.
Right, the Zhungar Hanate is kind of coming in as sort of what I'm going to call the Third Empire.
Gotcha, I won't spoil it. Spoil it then.
Well, the Manchus decide to completely take the Second Empire out of the picture, and that happens in about 1628, when Nurachi's successors show up on and complete wreck him. They had the mounted archer stuff, they had the supplies to keep going, and they had the guns ready to blast the Mongols off their horses, because you can fire your arrows as fast as you want. But keep in mind, that's a lifetime's worth of skill that you need to develop. One shot removes all that.
Well, the advantage the Manchu had was they were able to get the loyalty of a lot of Mongol tribes onto their side.
Right.
With this division of the later Yuan, as we've been discussing here, the Han's actual authority by the 1630s was pretty minimal. Ligdan, had things gone better, might have been able to avert some of this, but fate had other plans for him.
Yeah,
the Manchu were able to bring Mongols to their banner,
right?
Literally, and I don't know if it was before this point or afterwards, but we're intermarrying with notable Mongol families.
Oh, that's actually his kid. That's actually his kid, and Ejie technically succeeds upon Ligdan's death of smallpox, which happens shortly after he gets captured by the Manchus.
He spends his last couple years is just running from the Manchu, isn't he?
Yeah, either running or getting captured. It's one of those two things.
It's not a glorious period either way.
And Ejie basically remains as this very symbolic, as an extremely symbolic ruler, somehow even more symbolic than Buyan Sechen Khan. And eventually the Qing just are like, enough with the intermediaries, we're ruling over you directly. And
Ejie Han, he, if I'm remembering correctly, he actually, when he surrenders, he provides the Qing, I don't think they were quite the Qing dynasty yet, but he provides the Manchu with the seal of the Yuan emperors, supposedly the same one Kublai had used.
Right.
200 years prior.
I find that a bit unlikely, but
more than that, 400 years. I was thinking wrong century there. But yes, the seal, it's sort of the ceremonial end of the Mongol Empire, the final independent Mongol Han, the final Chinggisid Han in Mongolia proper.
Right. Because we're still not out of those.
There's, I think the Manchu, in like the Mongol versions of the name, were actually taking the title Han.
Right.
Some of the Qing rulers would have been of Chinggisid descent because they were marrying into the noble Chinggisid family lines.
Right.
So technically, we're Chinggisid Hans.
But maternal lines are never all that legitimate. No offense to maternal lines. Because
they call him Gurkhan, Gurigan, son-in-law.
Yes, indeed.
That was what Timur took, but yeah, sorry. Continue.
And anyway, so the Dzungars are officially in the picture, and they're specifically working in the West Empire, and whatever's left of the Oirats generally just joins up within the new Dzungar coalition. Mm-hmm. And they establish their small empire, and they beat off the Altan Han again, and they keep up their alliances with Tibet. But of course, there are going to continue to be problems. But in the meantime, with the Dzungars setting up everything, there's enough communication for one diplomat known as Zaya Pandita to actually translate some Tibetan Buddhist texts into the Mongolian. And the Buddhism is known as a connector between the two states. And we're looking at specifically with their leadership being at first under Gush Khan, and then their leadership specifically falling under the more famous Galdan Khan, who officially unites everybody that's left by 1678.
It was under Galdan, I think. The very final remnants of the Chagatai Khanates were finally put out of their misery.
Oh, right. Yeah, they're still around.
The final ones. That was somehow the single most unstable Hanite of the bunch ended up being the one where the longest remnants were left.
Who knew that the kid that was going to be sworn, who was officially forced off of the position to be a great Han, managed to stick around longer than everybody else?
He actually literally in his own lifetime survived all his brothers.
Because he didn't drink all that much. Pro tip, if you're a Mongol Han, don't drink. It's really bad.
Good old Chagatai, eh?
And the Dzungars are mainly trading salt for guns. And they're getting their guns from the Russians, who are encroaching, and most of the encroaching is actually done by a very famous Russian Tsar. You might have heard of him, Ivan the Terrible.
Oh, God.
Yes. Yes.
Ivan Grozny. Grozny, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. Although some of the other encroachment is done by one of Ivan's later successors, Boris Godunov, one of the very few Russian tsars that dies without proper succession.
Well, so as the Russians are expanding across Siberia into Central Asia there, and as the Dzungars are, of course, expanding, in between that, they have still the Kazakhs, Great Hordes, Middle Hordes, the Lesser Hordes. So you have the Kazakh Khanites, the Uzbeks, the Armenians, the Shibanids, the Khanites, Bokhara,
right,
whatever the other ones were. And so the Dzungars are expanding east, dislodging all of these peoples. This is when you have the Kalmyks. The Kalmyks make their own flight from sort of Western Mongolia across, ending up to the west side of the Caspian. And so this is a huge, huge period of destabilization across Central Asia. And this is kind of the start of when Central Asia itself stops being such a financial hub, stops being such the highway between East and West, of course aided by the transcontinental travel establishment of the United States and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Those colonies. So the Dzungars actually have quite a negative reputation in Central Asian countries, Kazakhstan. There's a Kazakh film, Nin Bala, I think is its name, and sort of a folk legend. And so the Dzungars are the antagonists there, and they're all in like black armor. And,
oh, wow.
They look like something from Lord of the Rings.
My goodness, they're about as blunt as Star Wars.
Yes, and in the same direction, I think the Dzungars end up briefly taking over Tibet. Do they not?
I believe, yeah, that's about right. One of their, I believe Galdan actually manages to rig the election of the Dalai Lama. Or no, wait, wrong dating. That's one of the later Hans of the Dzungars, right? Yeah. Because Galdan still has problems to deal with on the expanding Qing end, because the Ming are officially out of the picture. The peasant revolt has completely rallied under the leadership of a guy by the name of Li Zicheng, and he shows up at Beijing, sacks it to a bloody pulp, gets the last Ming Emperor Shunzi to hang himself at his ancestral burial grounds, and says, "Hey, does anybody know where all the money went? Sorry, I hate to tell you this, Mr. Li Zicheng, but we've actually been broke for decades now." The thing, and the big reason why is because the entirety of the Chinese Empire has all of their currency based on silver, and there aren't enough natural sources of silver in China itself, meaning that they had to get their silver out of the Spanish Empire. And the Spanish Empire had a little bit of trading trouble with the silver at this point. So, naturally, the Chinese economy suffered.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I knew the Ming had a lot of other problems going on. I suppose that was just one more.
Yeah, climate change was also happening at this point in time, which is actually having a bit of a bad effect for whatever's left of the Second Mongol Empire and just the steppe tribes in general. They actually get a lot of very severe cold winters that are killing off a lot of the horses and the oxen, which are absolutely the lifeblood of how they're able to live on their pastoral lifestyle. And if you're losing more horses and oxen than you can make, well, you've got problems.
Well, or even in Mongolia today, if a herder has less than 100 animals, he's considered basically in poverty.
Oh, wow.
Well over 100 animals in order to replenish him out that die of old age, disease, but the winter, the lack of feed, cold weather. The Dzud is shown in Mongolia and get these levels of freezing and thawing, so the animals can't eat through the snow because there's this layer of ice underneath the snow.
Oh, no. Yeah,
the Mongols have never relied on fodder. It's always just been summer, winter grazing.
Right.
And you don't have that ample grazing. That's it for your horses, well, for your entire herds. So when that happens, that's very, very difficult on the Mongols. That especially will break down whatever political union is in the process of being formed there.
Yeah. So
one of the famous theories for the expansion of the empire, of the original Mongol Empire under Chinggis, was that there was a period of desertification, quite dry, in late 12th century Mongolia.
Oh, wow.
So that there was this need, once the empire was unified, all right, we have to go into China and get the resources we need for our herds and stuff. But over the 13th century, that's the Little Ice Age, or starting, and it gets wetter. So then you have this huge expansion of grassland, the grass, very high nutrients, fantastic for the animals, more Mongols, and this allows a population growth to accommodate the expansion of the empire. Although I've never been much to put it all on environmental theory, but that is one thing, just one example of how environment plays a role in the steppe regions.
Well, to take it from the Chinese history angle that I've often come across is you can't always blame all the faults of how an empire falls just on one thing. You can't all pin it on one guy, sadly.
Yeah, you can. It's that they lost the mandate of heaven. And everything else is just a result of that. The Yellow River, but you could sort of do like an ad-libs of like the fall of every Chinese dynasty is like, oh, Yellow River floods in this direction. Now it's coming blank north or south of Shandong. Oh, and then the barbarians invade from blank north direction, northeast direction, and oh, there's a peasant uprising in blank, and oh, the emperor is now not interested in ruling, and blank. You know, it's very similar things you see
every single time.
Every time the Yellow River, they're trying to sorrow. I don't know off the top of my head if it like was breaking its banks at the end of the Ming Dynasty. I could probably bet good money though it probably was.
Yeah, they
breaks its banks, displaces people, loss of farmland, expansion of disease, transient. Well, it's the end of the Yuan Dynasty in China. That's what we were. All that fun stuff.
But Galton is doing mostly fine, and he is expanding. But meanwhile, the Qing are consolidating their bases over in China because, well, they still have their own problems. Like, for example, Taiwan is actually specifically solidly Ming under the former Ming general / pirate Zheng Chenggong. And that's actually going to stay very much independent up until about the 1680s.
The Southern Ming, is that what they call it?
Well, the thing is, the Southern Ming is very short-lived, and Zheng Chenggong actually never has any Ming emperors within his territory. So he
from the Southern. Okay.
The Southern Ming got obliterated in Nanjing very quickly after the death of the Shunzi Emperor, and Li Zicheng died in battle against the Manchus, so he's out. So he would be out of the picture.
Yeah, he didn't last very long.
And Zheng Chenggong managed to get the lucky shot of, I'm in Taiwan, and the Manchu haven't figured out how ships work. Yet. Because they're eventually going to figure it out. And with a little bit of help from the Taiwanese, strangely enough. But also because the sailing ban is kind of off, it's a lot easier to actually find the people who make the sails. Not that the sailing ban was able to be properly enforced. But that's China for you.
This is a huge, from what I understand, the Qing emperors, the early ones at least, not Hong Taiji, but what was the successor there? Why can't I remember?
When Narachi comes Hong Taiji, then I believe it's another Shunzi. Yeah,
well, so they sort of, now correct me if I'm wrong, but they kind of present themselves as, we're, because Beijing fell to the peasant rebellion, that Qing came in there, we're sort of, we're here to restore stability to China. We're not here to raid and plunder like the Mongols. We're here to bring order, security back.
Bring back the mandate of heaven.
Chinese. Exactly. I believe there's some that went on. It's not till quite a bit later that they have the law where everyone has to get their hair in the
queue. Yes. This will become a very important part of the American stereotype of the Chinese, like with that very long hair, short guy does all the work and then gets excluded because he did all the work.
That very stereotype of the Chinese is Manchu hair and Manchu clothing and Manchu facial hair.
Yeah, and that was actually a very hard thing for the Chinese people to accept, because the hair is supposed to be a gift from your mom and dad, and managing it into a very long ponytail kind of breaks the Confucian family norms.
Yes, shaving it, and hair, of course, has always been a very important part of ethnic distinction lines in Eastern Asia. The Mongols, of course, have their very famous where you shave the head except for that lock in the forehead behind the temples, and it's braided into loops behind the ears. The Khitans you shave the head, but you leave just the temples.
Oh,
and
wow.
it's like this like strands like coming down from here. Looks ridiculous. The worst one is the Tangut.
Oh, no.
It was, so the head's shaved. It's called a tufa. The head's shaved, except for at the front here. So you leave the temples kind of like the Khitans, and they're supposed to be like thick bangs. But then also you leave the bangs too.
Oh, wow. That looks a little bit like what the Franks have.
Like an M kind of shape, kind of the front of your head, and then the rest is shaved.
Oh, wow.
And it's just the ugliest thing going.
That sounds a lot like what the Franks had over in, I believe, pre-Charlemagne times.
The nice thing is, it makes, when you're seeing these artworks from the period, it's very easy to tell, all right, this is supposed to be a Tangut, this is supposed to be a Khitan, this is supposed to be a Mongol.
Oh, wow.
It's very, and so you can tell them apart from the Chinese easier. So, but that gets to the point of the cue there, of course, is you're breaking down the tribal lines, how we identify themselves, how we tell ourselves apart from these barbarians from the north.
Yeah. And so, but in the meantime, the Qing dynasty is not a big fan of the Zhongars, and specifically Kangxi, after he settles a couple of rebellions back home, decides to invade in 1690. But Galdan decides to do the ye olde strategy of burn everything and keep on withdrawing. So Kangxi, with a complete lack of supplies and being unable to keep up with the Zhongar hordes, decides to withdraw back to normal Chinese borders. But that doesn't mean that the end of troubles are in, because the Russians are also Zhongar allies at this point. That's how the Zhongars are getting a hold of their guns. And they want to expand the Chinese territory to kind of start trading with the Chinese a bit more directly, kind of cut the Zhongars out as the sort of middleman. And specifically around 1689, the Russians have a fortification set up by a Polish exile known as Albazin. And the Qing are like, we do not like this fort at all. We're going to burn it.
Is that the one on the Amur River?
That's exactly right. And they actually proceed to burn it down. And the Russians then go back there, build it up later when the Qing leave. But then the Qing are like, we're back, and we're burning it down a second time. You gotta not accept us as the Middle Kingdom and the supreme power up in here. And the Russians are like, but we want you to say yes to the Tsar. Prince of Heaven never says yes to the Tsar, if you're wondering.
We just want a warm water port. Come on.
That's the Russian story. Yeah, warm water ports. Save.
All we want.
Well, all we want is a warm water port. We get more crack.
Travel all the way across Siberia, and it's like, it's still frozen on the other end? What the hell?
Yeah.
Really unfair.
And they're... And the thing is, the Zhongars are not exactly in the best state, which is why Kangxi also picked this timing to try to invade Galdan, because Galdan kind of got embroiled in the middle of a civil war with Tsuewang Rabdan. Sorry if I'm butchering that pronunciation. And the thing is, Rabdan is actually his nephew, because Galdan got into a feud with his brother, killed him. Tsuewang Rabdan got pissed off because, well, you killed my dad. And everything went downhill from there. And Tsuewang Rabdan doesn't get crushed very quickly. He keeps on just surviving every single battle with Galdan, whether he's winning or losing. So that's just an eternal problem in Galdan's backside for the rest of his reign. And Galdan within this is also getting into a dispute between the left and right wings of the Mongol Empire. And with that in mind, I'm going to actually try to restart the recording, because the app is telling me to get off to start recording a new segment before everything goes down. So I'll just head straight to commercial break.
Gotcha.
So, few minutes. Ever wanted to start a podcast but never found the time, or found that SoundCloud makes you pay for more upload time? Then Anchor is the right place for you. It is a Spotify company that allows for unlimited uploading time for free and distributes your content to people via Spotify, Google Podcasts, iTunes, etc. It will also allow for sponsors and will sponsor you themselves. Your viewers can also create a donation plan through the same company to support your content. Sign up for Anchor today and get your podcast going. Because Anchor is great. Hey, and we are back from our brief commercial break.
The Mongolian Podcast. This is a theme song.
And of course, you know our hosts. Myself, Samwise J. Morgenstern, otherwise known as Janos Bizjubi, also known as Robin. And of course, our wonderful guest, Jack Meister.
Oh.
Also known as Jack. And we have been leaving with the idea of Galden is trying to interfere in some oldie problems of what's left of the Second Mongol Empire. He's specifically working on a dispute with the left and right wing, which is actually a dispute that also the Kangxi Emperor and the Dalai Lama are involved with, because the left and right wings are trying to figure out who's in charge, and they're both screaming me. Which is never a good time to be Sable.
The Zhengars, and I don't know if it's at this point, but they invade Mongolia proper.
Yes, they do. They actually kick the Khalkhas a bit pretty hard.
There's quite an expansionism of the Zhengars.
And there's sort of
always been, to me, one of those interesting things, because if for the Zhengars, of course, being a lot of them Oirat origins there, but would have been the Oirats were, of course, part of the Mongol Empire under Chinggis. Mm-hmm. For some of them invading Mongolia proper, it'd be kind of like we're returning to the homeland. None of us have ever been to Mongolia itself, but this is where our fathers, our grandfathers, our ancestors were from. This is, of course, for every nomadic empire, even non-Chinggisids like Zhengars, that Chinggisid ideal, Chinggis Khan himself, he is still the ideal steppe ruler. Even if the Oirats don't have Chinggisid leaders, everyone's comparing themselves to Chinggis Khan once, even if to marry into the family, take a Chinggisid wife, or you marry your son to a Chinggisid wife. You have Chinggisid generals. You do things to emulate the life of Chinggis Khan. Of course, this goes right from Timur in the 14th century all the way to Nadir Shah in the 18th century.
Wait, Nadir Shah? Oh, yeah, he's one of the many who pillaged India and specifically took the peacock throne. Yeah,
well, Nadir Shah, what a combination. He was purposely trying to emulate Timur and Chinggis Khan. You end up on the other side of that. That is not terribly good for you.
Don't worry, he ends up on the end of his generals not wanting to be executed.
He died syphilis or something?
I thought he got stabbed by his generals.
Yes, you're right. He's in his there's like an assassination on there was an assassination attempt on him, and then he lost his mind and started killing his generals and followers and stuff, and then a bunch of his followers betrayed him and attacked him while he was sleeping in his yurt.
Right.
And killed him, and then all of his army just breaks up, go their separate ways. One of his generals goes and founds the Duranis in Afghanistan.
Oh, wow.
If I'm not wrong.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
But anyways, Kangxi decides to exploit the civil war and invade the empire again, and this time he's a lot more successful because Tsoyung Rabden has actually been gaining a lot of support, drawing support away from Galden, and that eventually leads to a massive victory for the Qing over Zhao. And that's partly thanks to the guns, the superior numbers, just absolutely everything going wrong for Galden, and he keeps on trying to flee, and he dies about 2 years later, somewhat mysteriously, if I remember correctly. But Tsoyung Rabden is by no means done with trying to be Jungar Khan, and he gets the post. And Kangxi, thinking that he's again probably overextended thanks to his overly long supply lines, decides to go back to Beijing. And there's sort of a resurgence of the Jungar Khanate, and the Qing are generally held at bay. And the Russians and the Tibetans are like, we'll acknowledge this quite nicely. But they're also trying to get the idea of, hey, can we be great Hans? But you aren't related to Chinggis. Okay, that's fine. And the Dalai Lama is like, hey, wait, does somebody need an empty title? Because we can totally handle one that I cannot translate or pronounce. And this is specifically known as Erdeni Zurik Tu Hong Taiji.
Erdine, that's, or Erdine, that's Mongolian for jewel.
Oh, wow.
Isn't it? Yeah, Erdinian Tupshi means
right.
Is usually translated as Bejeweled Chronicle.
Right, because Altan Topshi is Golden Chronicle.
Yeah, Altan Han, Golden Han. That was also what the Mongols called the Jin Emperor in the 12th century.
Oh, right, because Jin means Golden Dynasty.
Mongols, yeah, if you read the secret history of the Mongols, the Jin Emperor is only ever called the Altan Han. I think there's one line, Ergadai says the Emperor's name, but it's like a pun on his name.
Oh, wow.
It means in Mongolian something like servant or one who kneels.
Oh, ill, yeah.
Yeah, something like that. But yes. Anyways, titles.
So but another thing happens is that the Russians are going to get into some clashes with Jungar, specifically over gold in about 1715. So for anybody who knows anything about the Russian Empire, we've got the coolest Russian Tsar, Peter the Great. And
tallest one too.
Right, he was very imposing. Also,
like 7'5".
Also, like the best.
Wow.
Oh wow! If I remember correctly, he was also really good with cannons.
He somehow this giant went undercover like across Europe and like looked at things and came back with all these ideas. And I get wondering how would he? I don't know like his exact type, but he was like so tall. Like all I'm picturing him is like with his like all his Tsar regalia on, and just like a cloth like over his head, kind of like a Thor and Thor Ragnarok there.
Yeah, I can totally see that.
And it's still clearly Thor, but he's just got like a shawl on his giant.
Like now you can't see me.
And the Mongols respond with some raids to Peter's encroachment, and Peter responds with a bunch of fort building. And there are some rivalries that the Qing are also trying to exploit, and specifically the rivalries come with Lazan Khan, who is actually the Jungar that decides that taking over Tibet and rigging the Dalai Lama's choosing is going to be happening. So he rigs the stuff by taking over the Patala Palace, and he holds up everything, and he wins some skirmishes, but initially against Tsuing, but with the help of the Qing, but then Tsuing comes in when the Qing are a little sleepy and attacks Patala, killing Lazang. And the Chinese respond with a new campaign to avenge their ally. Of course, that didn't exactly work out, because the army was completely KO'd, and the whole thing is, and the whole army under the Mongol named Urente is completely annihilated. But the next army sent by Yindi manages to get in a quick victory, but with supply problems, they again have to go home. And Yindi is actually very important here because he's actually one of the many heirs to the aging Kangxi Emperor. And this is the 1720s, and Kangxi, the longest reigning Chinese emperor in history, has officially died. And Yongzheng decides that he's going to be a whole lot less expansionist. I think this comes out of the fact that he actually comes to the throne much later than Kangxi. He's, I believe, somewhere in his middle age, while Kangxi came to the throne as a 6-year-old. But also it's because Yongzheng wants to achieve immortality. I mean, like a lot of Chinese emperors do, but Yongzheng is about it as Qin Shi Huang, which is pretty problematic. Thankfully, it doesn't take any mercury, but the immortality pills are still very deadly because the Chinese have absolutely no idea what they're doing. Because there is no immortality pill. There is no Santa Claus.
Just death.
The sweet embrace of death.
And in the meantime, Tsering Rabden actually dies, and Galdan Saren actually takes over the empire, and he has many more successful raids, and this is going into about the early 1700s, but in the meantime, the Qing also are starting to implement a trade policy to try to get rid of the Jungars as a political threat. First, they drown them in luxuries because the Chinese have everything ranging from tea, silk, printing, gunpowder, just about everything in the room.
Well, that's been their strategy for the nomads back to the Xiongnu.
But this is spammed.
We'll civilize them through our. They'll make them so they'll love Chinese objects so much they'll lose their military edge completely. Or we'll just absorb them, kind of.
Yeah.
How will they want to fight us? They'll just want to be us.
And of course, divisions are continually exploited. And after Galdan Saren dies, his successor Tsuewang Dorji Namjal is completely paranoid. He has all the problems of the bad Genghis Khans rolled into one. He drinks, he kills dogs, he goes paranoid, and thinks that people are trying to assassinate him.
Hang on. What was that last bit before drinks?
He kills dogs?
After drinks? What?
He kills dogs. Yeah, he's another animal cruelty specialist.
Time machine, so I can behead him.
Do you know Genghis Khan was afraid of dogs?
I did not know that.
That's in the secret history of the Mongols. I'm not making that up. That's one of the early, not long after his birth. I forget the exact context, but it mentions that he's afraid of dogs.
Right.
So always been to me part of the evidence that the secret history was written like 1228.
Right.
Rather than started in 1250, because if the whole thing was started in 1250, why on earth would you include that?
It is an yeah, Hamarosan, got it. I have to go to an activity pretty soon, but I'm going to quickly finish up the Jungars because we're basically turning them into the Great Plains Native Americans here, giving them basically the exact same treatment. Alcoholism, extreme luxuries, and reservations included.
Oh boy.
But anyways, we got to kill off this crazy Khan who drinks and kills dogs, and he gets paranoid enough to think that his sister Lambayar is plotting against him when she tries to just say, "Can you be a little bit less dog killing?" But she's thrown in prison, but Lambayar's husband decides, well, I'm revolting, and Dorji's brother Lamadarya also revolts, and they manage to kill Tsewang after he is blinded and imprisoned. And the Qing decide to do a bit of power flexing on the Tibetans by choosing the next Dalai Lama, so that's another ally out of the picture. But Lama Darya, who is officially left in charge of the Third Empire, has to fight some of his generals, most notably Amursana. And Dashidawa is the other general that he has to fight, but Dashidawa is also a bit of a drunkard. So that's not too much of a problem, but eventually Lama Darja's army mutinies and kills him, and another general, Dawachi, manages to come to power. Meanwhile, Amursana kind of flees to the Qing dynasty. He kind of goes off as a bit of a sort of Robin Hood / El Cid kind of character. He kind of just keeps on switching sides, raiding, trying to keep whatever power he has left. And it's actually going pretty well for him. He's continuing to thorn in the side of the Third Empire, which is continually collapsing, and the Qing are continuing to encroach. Actually, if you want to continue the analogy of this is kind of like American history, they're also sending Chinese settlers to sort of tame the steppe. This isn't going as well as the American version because no railroads and, well, not much corn farming either to actually do farming things. Also, little ice ages happening. So that, but it is happening enough that there's not enough grazing land for every Mongol, and every Mongol that submits to the Qing in the Third Empire now is confined to essentially a reservation. You have only this much grassland for your herds to feast on, and that gets kind of problematic because then they overgraze and then start dying. So naturally, there are many problems.
When your whole lifestyle depends on the availability of grassland, surviving of your animals, not having that grassland and having your animals die, you're literally left with nothing except what the government, Qing dynasty, is willing to provide for you.
Right. Sort of living on government supplies. This is sounding suspiciously like the American stuff. I actually managed to speak to one of my Native American friends on this, and she was like, this is exactly what was happening. But Amursana is kind of still running around, apparently pulling off his Geronimo impression quite well. But he also keeps on demanding to be Khan of the Dzungars, perhaps even Great Khan. The Qing also say no to that. And cattle keeps on being sold to pay debt, but now also Mongol generals are being sent to pursue Amursana, which also isn't working out. In fact, one general, Chingunjar, refuses to pursue Amursana and triggers a revolt. But he doesn't have enough union to have the forces to challenge the Qianlong Emperor, who is now in charge. And Amursana is very quickly defeated. And Chingunjar is very swiftly defeated, and Amursana keeps on eluding, but it's just not working out as it used to. And while he kind of disappears / dies of old age, there's just no Mongol independence achieved. But in the meantime, the Qing are also massacring their prisoners, specifically the young men of fighting age. So naturally, the Mongols just don't have enough fighters. They just don't have enough grassland, no horses, straight out of cattle. It's just all bad and all misery all around. Kind of makes Van Du Hai feel very sad from her grave. But anyways, I've got places to go, and I imagine Jackmeister has his own schedule somewhere. And
do I?
And we're going to wrap up here. So you can find us over. You can find my Patreon at Samwise J. Morgenstern. You can also tweet me at YoungBards101. You can also follow us on Facebook via History with Samwise J. Morgenstern. And, of course, Jackmeister, you can find him on his own Facebook page, which I will try to link in the description. And, of course, there is his YouTube channel, which you should absolutely subscribe to. The eternal heaven demands it. We also have a Tumblr at GoSMJ42 Mongol History. I'll also be linking that. And, Robin, basically, just search up Bizjubi wherever, and you'll find her fabulous art. And our Patreon.
Oh my gosh, art! I hope you don't find my art. You'll be more likely to find my drag, which is not quite the art that anyone probably would expect to find, but that's what you'll find.
You can also support us on Anchor over here, and if you want to ever go onto the Patreon, I have every tier named after a son of Genghis.
Even the bastard sons?
Not the illegitimate ones, all the ones through Borte's line primarily. So we have a tier named. So we have a tier for. We have a tier for Jochi, which is basically you get early access to the content, the shout out in the episodes. Then at the $5 level, you get my fan fiction story and get to be known as the Chagatai tier patron. And the Ogaday stuff also gets some extra perks. I can't exactly rattle them off here off the top of my head, but it also includes all the perks of the $5 and $1 tiers, which are early access and the fanfiction story. Perhaps the $10 Ogaday tier could also get a bracelet to compensate for the drunkardness.
Yeah.
But anyways, you have been watching the Mongols Podcast. This is Samwise J. Morgenstern, Bizjubi, and our wonderful Jackmeister.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Yeah, peace out.
Auf Wiederhören, I guess.
all in the name of the Han and the will of eternal blue heaven, we are all signing out. Love you guys.
Tschüss.
And here you have witnessed the season finale of the first season of the Mongols Podcast. With the entirety of the Second Empire dead, the Jungars conquered, and China ruling over everything that the Russians don't have. As usual, you can find the Mongols Podcast on Anchor and tweet me at YoungBards101, as I have already stated before. Furthermore, our Patreon tiers are as follows. The Tolui tier, named after the youngest son of Genghis Khan, will get early access to our content and a shout-out in all of our podcasts. The Ogodai patrons will also get the same benefits as the Tolui patrons, and alongside a short story based around their original character, and the ability to vote in the polls. And of course, those polls require to be created. That is where the Chagatai patrons come in. They can suggest polls. Of course, I shall be creating my own. And the Chagatai patrons shall also get the same benefits as the Ogodai and Tolui patrons. Thank you for listening to the Mongols Podcast. I will also be recommending that you purchase a copy of China Marches West or borrow it from your local library. And we shall be returning with Season 2, Episode 1, How the Heck Does Mounted Archery Actually Work?